Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another week of virtual learning for April 27th through May 1st. It's nice to see May 1st on the calendar. It means that we're slowly making our way to the end of this craziness. I'm going to go through a lot of information with you, so bear with me and make notes as you're listening so that when you need to revisit what I said or as you're reading and you get confused and you have questions, you can ask me questions. And if we need to host a Google Meet this week to go over some things, I'm always happy to do that with you guys and answer some questions. So we'll see how the week progresses and how many emails I get about this. Because this is one of the trickier chapters in this book as far as the concept and the way you have to think about what Tim O'Brien is telling us in this story. So here's your calendar. Monday and Tuesday, you have time to read How to Tell a True War Story and The Dentist. Our focus is really on that first chapter, How to Tell a True War Story. It is a little long, so we did give you 2 days to read it. And then there's a chart and a journal response for that, which I will show you in a minute. And that is due Tuesday night to Google Classroom. Wednesday, you're going to write a formative assessment that will go to turnitin.com. I'll tell you more about that later. And then Thursday, we assign the next chunk of reading that is due on Tuesday. So you have Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday to get the chapters Sweetheart of Song Trebong read. So the chart that we're looking at is this one, this How to Tell a True War Story chart. The top part of it, where I want you to write the definition of what a true war story is and what it is not. You'll find that explicitly in the text. Tim O'Brien talks about what makes a war story true and what makes it not true. So you're going to take that directly from the book. In the bottom part of the chart, so he goes back and forth in this chapter with a couple different stories. The Kurt Lemon's death one, he'll tell it to you once and then he'll come back to it a couple of times. And so you're piecing this story together. And you want to look at how the story is changing every time he tells it. And so this first column is what happens in the story, like what actually is the story. So for in Kurt Lemon's death in that story, the basic summary is that Lemon was playing catch with Rat Kiley. They were tossing this like smoke bomb back and forth to each other. He steps on a booby trap and that kills him. So when we talk about what seemed to happen, it's where we start to see these things that are probably not true as far as fact, but they're true to the narrator. They're true to the person telling the story. So there's a part in there where Tim O'Brien, the narrator, talks about how he saw Kurt Lemon step from the shade into the sunlight, and then the sunlight lifts him up into the tree. Well, that can't really happen, right? What's actually happening is his body is blown to bits by this booby trap that he steps on, and it's his body parts that have been like thrown up into the tree. And so it's not that it's not true, but it's not a fact. Okay. And so it's the way that the narrator who experienced this traumatic event understands the story as to what seemed to happen from his vantage point. So then that third column of what actually is true. This is much more thematic. So what I want you to be thinking about is what is the message about storytelling that Tim O'Brien is trying to tell us? And so what we're looking at in Kurt Lemon's death is the way that these traumatic experiences are remembered differently, how it's a way for the people who experience them to cope with or to make sense of pain and death and losing loved ones. And so you can see in this column that there's nothing specific to the actual story. So be really careful about that. This column all the way down for the other stories that happen in this chapter, you should not have anything textually specific. I want you to think broader and more thematically. Okay, so I hope that makes sense to you. Um, so what I want to show you now are just some notes that kind of talk you through these ideas, and I'll post this too for you to read on your own. Remember that the novel itself it's not about the Vietnam War. The focus is why we tell stories. And we talked about that earlier on when we first started the book. So O'Brien is always looking at what's the purpose of the stories. There's bias in the stories that we tell. There's subjective reporting because we're telling our stories from our vantage point, from our interpretation of events. And so we want to be thinking about why do people do this? What's the purpose of stories in our lives? And that concept goes back to this chart, right? Where we're looking at why does the author or the narrator tell us this story? And the reason why he tells us the story of Kurt Lemon is so that he can deal with what he witnessed and how to recover from that. He O'Brien also looks at the idea that truth and fact are not necessarily the same thing. So think, for example, of like if you asked your parents the story of how they met, right? There are facts in there, right? If they met the senior year of high school in their gym class, no one can refute those facts. But the truth of it is going to be a little bit different. So what your dad first said to your mom might be a little bit different from your dad's interpretation of it than what your mom remembers. And that doesn't mean that either one of them is lying or either one of them is necessarily wrong. It's just that that's what they remember about this true fact of the first time we met was when we were, senior year in gym class or whatever it was. And even that might, one might argue, no, 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 the first time we met was when we were in chemistry. And the other one might argue, no, 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 the first time we met was when we were in gym class. Okay. So even within like this fact of, okay, they met in high school can be argued as far as the truth of it. Okay. So I hope that makes sense. It's hard to do this when I don't see your faces and your responses to things. Um, this style is considered metafiction, where he's telling us stories about storytelling. So he's like metacognition is thinking about your own thinking. So metafiction is storytelling about storytelling. So he's looking at the value of experience, the malleability of memory, and malleability is how memory can be manipulated and how it can change. And then these differences between fiction and reality. So think about the following questions. What's the effect on you, the reader, when a narrator tells us a story only to come back to it later and add, subtract, change details because that's what we see in the Kurt Lemon part of it? So do you trust the narrator? Does it make the story more or less true for you? How do we trust storytellers when they use phrases like, here's a story I never told before? Do we really believe them? Do we feel like we've been let in on some secret and they really, really trust us? What does it make us feel when a storyteller constantly tells us this is true, this part is true? That's a true story that never happened. How do we as the reader gauge, well, what do we believe and what do we not believe? Because this makes us feel like the narrator is being unreliable. Um, what parts, if any, of the four stories are in fact true? Do these things actually happen? Okay. All right. So I know that that's a lot to process, but keep going back to the different versions that people tell of real stories and the things that they experience. And there are a bajillion examples that you could use from your own real life. And if we were in class, I would probably ask you to share some of those things. But we're not. So again, go back to that idea of like, okay, if I ask my grandparents how they met, one's going to tell me one story, one's going to tell me a different story. I have to figure out where the fact is in that and where the truths lie in that. Right. All right, last thing we're going to talk about is this formative assessment that you're going to do. So you're going to write an extended response prompt for me. So in How to Tell a True War Story, Tim O'Brien writes that that's a true story that never happened. Using his explanation in the chapter, explain how a story can be true even if it did not actually occur, and then explain his purpose for blurring the line between fact and fiction. This grade is going in the writing category, so you do want to make sure that you're organized and you have good structure and all that stuff. Remember that there are two parts to this prompt. First, you need to explain how a story can be true even if it did not happen. And think about those broader ideas in this chart right here, the what is true. Okay. And then so obviously, like I just said, refer to that to help you with it. Use at least two examples from the chapter, from just the chapter, How to Tell a True War Story, to support your response. Your response should be about 3/4 of a page long, so that's almost a full page. Make sure your grammar, transition, sentence structure, all that is good, because again, I am assessing this as a writing grade. MLA citations for direct quotes and paraphrasing must be followed as well. So I should see parenthesis, O'Brien, page number, close parenthesis, when you're doing direct quotes and paraphrasing. And then your response needs to be submitted by Wednesday at 11:59 p.m. Watch your similarity. Anything more than 8% will be considered cheating. You are not going to include any of these directions on your document because it's going to throw off the similarity reports. So you want a clean doc. So open up a new document and type your response there, and then submit that to turnitin.com. All right, I said that was the last thing, but I lied. I forgot there was one more little thing I wanted you to do. At the bottom of your chart, there's a journal response here. This can be, a little more relaxed as a response. Um, but I want you to do this because it's going to help you to write that assessment piece. Okay, so give me a journal response, which considers storytelling as O'Brien has described it in the text. Consider the comments he makes in spin and how to tell a true war story. So go back to that chapter on spin. You can look at other chapters too. And some things to consider are how does storytelling impact the author? How does he use it? What does he use it for? How might it impact the other soldiers? And this is something that's going to continue throughout the book. So that's why I'm asking you to do so much with this one chapter, because we have a formative assessment right now, and then we'll have a summative assessment on these similar concepts. So I'm trying to build these like layers and levels of complexity for you, so that when we get to that summative, it makes a lot of sense, and then it's much less daunting, but task free to do. Okay. All right, I will stop because this one is incredibly long and I give you tons of information. Please ask questions. I probably should schedule a Google Meet so that we can talk about this stuff, but we'll see how the questions start to roll in, and then we will make a decision from there. All right, enjoy the sunshine today because the rest of the week is going to be rainy. Miss you guys. Bye.